Hi there, and welcome back to Stray Voltage. We are super excited to have everyone come back for another episode. I, of course, am Zachary Wilbur, and I am here again with my co host, Dan Molbach. And we have a guest for you all today that we are super excited to introduce. So, before we get into it, I'm going to have them introduce themselves. And then, after their introduction, we'll go back through everything else that we usually do for our introduction and then move right into the episode. So, Mike, why don't you say hi to everyone?
Hey everyone, thanks for listening. I'm Michael Szot. I'm a licensed professional counseling associate and or LPCA, or as I like to call it, learner's permit. And I'm happy to talk to you today about how that happened.
Yeah, and we're super excited to hear it. Dan, you want to say hi to everyone?
Oh, hello again, everyone. It is great to be back, and I'm super excited to talk to Mike and get into this next installment of our episodes.
Awesome. And something a lot of you may have recognized, or if you have not recognized it, you will soon, once I say it, is that this is our first video recorded episode. So for the first time, you can actually see what all of us look like. All right. You can see, I know there's some redness going on here, and we'll possibly mention that a little bit later about how snorkels don't rub really well against skin. Or maybe I just told the whole story, so you never know. With that said, before we jump in and before we have Mike kind of talk a bit about their journey, I would first like to remind everyone, all right, that once again, the views discussed here are not the views of Rutgers. They're not the views of the DOD. They're not the views of the United States Navy. They're strictly the views and opinions from myself, Dan Molbach, and those shared by this podcast. Dan, anything to add to that?
No, but that's really important. Disclaimers are always needed. I think we could also blend that disclaimer over to Mike as well, because he's got a lot of other kind of organizations that he's also attached to. So, but Mike can kind of go through that in order and let us know as well, and make sure that we're not like stepping on toes. So, and if we do, you got to tell us so that we can kind of throttle back. Okay.
It's
That's
okay.
it.
I'm sure they know how much of a unbridled liability I am.
Good. That makes things easier, actually.
Just kidding, guys. Maybe.
All right. Well, with all of that out of the way, why don't we have Mike kind of take us away? I know that you were an EOD technician. Can you kind of walk us through that journey from EOD technician to licensed clinical counselor associate?
Oh man. Well, let's see. When I was growing up, I really wasn't the best academically. I had a lot of difficulties, and a lot of that came from some environmentals and some stuff I would later learn in my own journey. But I actually went into delayed entry program in 1997, and they got me with this amazing special operations program called Undesignated. And
I think I've heard about that program before. I heard
Got
it's
'em.
where the best of the best go. That's usually how you become a Navy SEAL, right? Is through that specific program.
the whole thing is by the time I had figured out that I actually did have a brain between my ears, it was a little late in the game because I was in high school. But I to quote my good friend Tosh, I have regrets, but I don't regret having regrets because it was all necessary to kind of get me to where I needed to be. But I knew that if I had gone off to college for whatever reason, even community college, I wouldn't have done well, and I lacked a lot of academic discipline. So, unlike most people, I unselfishly took the ASVAB to get out of school for the day. So yeah. So I did not do so good on it. And as a result, the only jobs available to me at the time were undesignated or boatswain mate. And, or whatever. And I'm not crapping on anybody's job here either. I happen to have a lot of respect for anybody in any rate in the Navy.
There are some crappy jobs.
Yeah, I did a lot of them, to be honest with you. But what I did want is I wanted to be aviation. So I was like, yeah, can I be on an aircraft carrier? And they're like, you bet, Tiger. And I was like, sign me up. And yeah, so I enlisted in my junior year, and then I would go do, depth things and do push-ups and all that. And then in August of '98, I went off to Great Lakes. And I'll never forget my RDC, Chief Nelson. He's like, how many of you idiots are undesignated? I'm like, that did not go well. He's basically berated us for probably it seemed like an hour, but it was probably like 2 minutes. And I'm like, uh-oh. Anyway, again, made it out of there. And then I went to Strike Fighter Squadron 27 in Japan. And I really, really, really wanted to be an aviation electronic technician. So my chief, Archie Gaines, took a chance with me. And he said, I'll let you do the NEATS modules and do the rate training manuals. And if you do well, I'll let you challenge the exam. And I did. And I scored very high. And I ended up becoming an AT3. I wanted to become a fighter pilot. So I was pushing really hard to get into a ROTC program. And then I met a guy named Craig Vickers aboard the mighty warship Kitty Hawk. And, I'll never forget it because the guy was a unicorn, right? The most beautiful hair I'd ever seen. And I think that's what really drew me to this man. And I was asking him about, what is EOD? Because he was wearing this blue and gold shirt with EOD on it. And he explained it to me and everything. And I was all in. My skipper was not happy because, they were really wanting me to be to end up going and get a commission and flying. But I was all in on it. So my first couple of packages got shot down. Actually, I got one funny story. So it was my second screening test. My first screening test was a disaster because I didn't know how to side stroke.
So for the listeners too, what is a screening test?
Oh, yeah. Well, I don't know. Zach, you tell them since this is more your forte.
All right. Well, as the subject matter expert of Center for EOD and Diving, a screening test is what we utilize to ensure the physical fitness level is appropriate for someone trying to go within to the special warfare or special operations community, which, by the way, is completely different. Special warfare encompasses naval special warfare, SEAL, SWCC. Naval special operations includes Navy diver, dive medical technician, and of course, explosive ordnance disposal teams. Now, that said, both groups can work within naval special warfare or the special warfare community. Just kind of depends on where they get stationed at. For the screening test itself, it's going to comprise of a 500-meter swim, side stroke, or breaststroke. You're going to have max amount of push-ups in 2 minutes. You're going to have max amount of sit-ups in 2 minutes. And then, of course, you're going to have max amount of dead hang pull-ups. No time limit required until you drop. Finally, you have your mile and a half run, and the mile and a half run time is going to vary depending on the program you're going. Actually, for those who have not heard, the Navy EOD standard has recently been changed to 10:30 minimum for the run, and they removed the combined run and swim. The Admiral said that it should make the program easier to get into. However, I do not think that will make the program easier to get into. So we're waiting to see if that sticks. As of right now, it looks like that's the change that's happening to the PST standard. So
awesome.
Yeah, so those are screening tests for the Navy.
Right. Yeah, I got to stop at these stories because they're really funny. My first screening test, I might as well tell you about my first screening test. So the guys from Kitty Hawk, Mobile Unit 5, it was Craig Vickers and Brownie and Gunnar Williams. So they take me out in Tumon Bay, and they're like, if you really want to do this and you're going to party with us tonight and do your screening test in the morning. And I'm like, okay, because I had a bit of a drinking issue, and the issue was there was never enough alcohol. But whatever. So we get it. We get there. We get to the pool. I'm definitely full of regret and shame. And they're like, "All right, side stroke," and I'm like, "I don't." Okay, and I'm just kind of watching everybody do it. They're dying. The CMC was Rooster, and he's like, "What is happening? Is he having a convulsion in the water?" I ended up making the time. By the grace of God, I ended up making the time. And they're like, "There's no way you're gonna have anything left for this thing," and I did it. I ended up passing. I blew out whatever I had in my stomach when I passed the finish line for the run, and and then the CMC was like, "You are stupid, and I love you," like.
Well, that's how you know if you did the run well, is if you blow chunks by the end of the run. I tell all of our students this: if you're not throwing up by the end of the run, then you weren't running fast enough. And maybe it's an issue with the generation, but nowadays they game it and they're like, "Oh, I know, I just got to get under this," and so that's what they go for. No, long gone are the days where it's like, just run your little heart out as fast as you can and as hard as you can.
Yeah, it isn't about what you got. It's about what you got left. And that's usually not much. And going past that. But so everyone was excited, but unfortunately I wasn't cutting mustard because of that pesky ASVAB score. And even despite making second class AT2 from undesignated in under 3 years, actually, I was still not a good candidate. So they asked me to rescreen. So the second screening test is DET Japan, and it's February. So there was a twin pin there named Chief Grubb. And he goes, "All right, pool's broken. You can come back in the spring, or you could go swim the bay." And I was like, "Okay, I'll swim the bay, I guess. I mean, how cold could it be?" Um, So he hands me, like a cheater spring suit, which is like a onesie, a wrestling onesie. And he jumps in the water. He's like, "Woo, a little cold." I'm like, "Oh, the old guy's okay." So I jump in and my body locks up. He's like, "Yeah, I lied. You better start swimming before you pass out." And I did it. Like, I think at the time that was my fastest swim time. I came out of the water with caloric vertigo. I threw up all over the place. Because caloric vertigo is when you got different temperature differentials in your ear. So I had freezing water in one ear, and it was causing me to get the spins. But I blew chunks out, and I gave everything I had on everything after that. And he's like, "You're stupid, and you're stupid. I love you, man. You got a heart." And that got shot down. So by this time, I'm ready to transfer. So I got sent to AIMD North Island. I did that for a while. And then finally in 03, I got picked up and I became a PSI EOD Multi-Unit 3. PSI is Prospective Student Indoctrination, otherwise known as we are going to kick your guts in to see if we can get you to quit before you go to phase one.
It's interesting you mentioned the PSI because they're actually bringing that program back, or at least that's one of the ideas they're currently floating around. So a long time ago, I don't know if it was exactly the PSI, but they also used to have a program where if you were to fail out of EOD school, but you were a really good candidate, they would recycle you to a mobile unit and then they would resend you back to EOD school. That's another option they're talking about bringing back as well.
The program I think you're talking about is the Fourth Man Diver.
Oh, it might
And
be.
then the designation for that was 5339, EOD assistant. Because EOD was actually broken down a while ago. You had 5331, which was the NEC for an EOD assistant. So it's like everything up to you did demolition phase in EOD school, and then you go back, and then you can go back to become a 5332, which is a basic EOD tech no jump, and then 5333, which is basic tech jump, and then it all turned into M0, whatever it is now. I don't know. I'm Jurassic, which is fun, but yeah, no, I ended up doing that. made it. So, uh, at that time, I mentioned I had a bit of a drinking thing going for me, and no big deal. Top performer, I've always been a very good performer, and it worked out pretty good for me for a time. But we fast forward, graduating EOD school, going to EOD Mobile Unit 3. Some warning signs came. My first detachment, because we weren't platoons back then, we were detachments. I was on an ARG, amphibious readiness group, and we were training hard to go into Iraq with 1st Marine Division, working hand in glove with a couple of the other units like Force Recon and Marine EOD. And I had a bit of an attitude problem. I really did. I was monstrously insecure about things, and it definitely came out in my personality. Even though I was a top performer, my chief was like, "There's no fucking way I'm sending you," and rightfully so, But I was sour grapes about it. But somebody else went in my stead, and luckily they came back okay. But that was definitely a warning sign. But again, like I'm not saying I'm a narcissistic personality disorder or anything like that, but it was a very pervasive problem where it's affecting my attitude, and I had a couple other issues along the way, like I ran out of air. This is before that deployment, actually. This one really shook me up pretty bad. I was a cocky diver. We were doing mine clearance underneath ships, and they love doing that shit at 2 a.m. because why the fuck not, right? And so we're clearing.
Well, the mines won't be awake at 2 a.m., so you don't have to worry about it.
That's exactly right. And that's I think that's we shouldn't put that out on the internet. That's top secret. Explosive sleep at night, everyone. I said it.
Wait, sorry. Explosives don't actually sleep at night, so do not sue us if anything ever happens. All right. Be forewarned, they do not actually sleep at night.
Oh God. That's right. Can't make jokes. Boy, you guys are gonna have a devil of a time with me. Well, what had happened? I don't mean to jump around. I'm a little scatterbrained sometimes. I got kissed by the TBI ferry, which I'll talk about later. But what had happened was we're running out of jugs, and we can't find this last shape. It's a mine shape that's attached to the hull. So Captain Hero was like, "Hey man, I'll find it. I'll go all the way to the keel." And they're like, "Hey man, there's only 700 in this single." I'm like, "I'll get it. I got plenty of air." And that was a big mistake. So I'm kicking along. Usually get a little bell that you're coming low. Well, that bell didn't work. So you find out you run out of air on an exhale. And yeah. I'm like, okay, reach back, go to hit the reserve. Nothing. I'm like, okay, it's pitch black. I'm trying to find the hogging line to get up to the side, and I'm a little freaked out. So I'm starting to try to tug on the reg, but what's happening is water is getting in. And there's this mammalian reflex called laryngeal stimulation. So when your body thinks you're drowning, it's going to slam your larynx shut. So I get to my dive buddy and I signal him I'm out of air, and he puts the octo in my mouth, and I can't breathe. I'm like, crap. I'm like 4. And, and I'm blowing out, trying to get to the surface, and my field of vision's going out and come up, and it was a big fiasco. But again, why would I do that? I had 700 in the tank. Why would I do that? Why would I put my life in danger? And that's going to come into more focus as we continue, because I had very low value for my own life. So it's like, whatever. But I developed like this fear now, and now I had to face it, and it was bad, and I was trying to avoid diving. And I was like, send me back to dive school. I need to do pool hits. I got to do something. But it was like, no, dude, you're going to go. But it was good. It was good to be uncomfortable. You see, I was very comfortable because I felt very cocky and confident in diving. And then that happened and it shook me. So I honestly think it was a very fortunate event that occurred. But it also kind of dislodged me from this thinking that I'm invincible. So, you know, that 26-year-old kid that I was, you know, goes on that deployment, and then because of his shitty attitude, ends up losing his slot, whatever. Definitely steaming hard, drinking hard, you know, when we hit port, and it's not good, you know, no ARIs to speak of, but again, kind of a warning sign or two. So now I get back and I go to an EOD platoon or company that's going to M&D North in Iraq, and we're grinding hard, and I'm busting my hump and doing everything I can, and you know, and we go, and yeah, it was war. It was real freaking war, real sleep deprivation, real IEDs, real gunfights, real horror every day. Pieces of people, you know, um, almost getting my brains blown out a lot, getting blowed up. Don't recommend it, you know. And I'd like to tell you I didn't get affected by that, but I did. And while I was in country, I noticed when we were in the DFAC, which is a dining facility with the Army, I'm like really keyed up and nervous, and I can't figure out like what the hell's wrong with me. But even like the other members of my team were saying that, like, yeah, man, like, I don't know why these guys are staring at us. I'm like, because we don't look like them for one, you know, like we're
Real
you know.
quick on the keyed up thing for some of our viewers who might not be from the military or have that sort of experience, could you kind of explain what you mean by you were keyed up?
Hyper vigilant. I'm now watching everybody watching me. I'm watching hands. I'm more focused on what's going on, like too hyper focused on the situation, starting to feel levels of agitation and such. So, okay, cool. You know, whatever. Everyone else is kind of going through it, and we bust each other's chops about it. But now comes a really pivotal part. There was an EOD tech, one deployment cycle before us that came clean about having some issues, and they pulled him, and it really sent shockwaves through all of us. So basically, when the surveys came about PTS, we were all told, don't say anything. Don't say anything. They'll pull your clearance. You're never going to hold a gun again. You're never going to do any of that. So it's like, don't tell the truth no matter what. Done deal. Yep. Didn't see anything terrible. I sleep fine. I'm not sleeping at all. You know, like all this stuff. And we get sent home. And I'll never forget touching down in San Diego and that ramp dropping on the C-17, and all I wanted to do is be back in Iraq. Like, I was not good. I had to be drunk to be out in town. I didn't even want to see my family who had came to visit, and I begged them not to come, but they came, and it was rough. It was rough, but I didn't have a problem. I was fine, you know. And then I come back and get into an NSW team, and you know, we're rolling and going again. And I remember touching down in Iraq and feeling relieved that I was back. I was so relieved to be back. And
If you don't mind me asking, you mentioned earlier like you were fine. At this point in your timeline, is that something you were telling yourself like I'm fine, or was it something that wasn't even something you noticed yet?
I was not ready to even recognize for a moment that I was not okay. I wasn't. I was very terrified of even admitting that. So what I was doing in these situations is I'm gravitating towards people that are doing the exact same pathological shit as me. You see, that way I can't be not okay, if that makes sense. And
No,
a lot
that completely makes sense. Yeah, like
a
you're kind
lot
of in this solidarity kind of state where it's like I'm doing what everyone else is doing.
I'm just I'm going to the bar, we're being Vikings. That's what Vikings do. We go out, we party hard, and all these things, and all these euphemisms that were very self-destructive. But being back at war like gave me a tremendous sense of relief, and it was a great deployment. Like, we did a lot of good stuff, and then I tried to stay with another SEAL team because they didn't have EOD support, and I'm like, oh, I'll totally stay with them, and they're like, dude, your eye tempo's too high. And I was like, yeah, that's not even real. But I ended up having to become an EOD instructor. And it was actually kind of fortunate that it happened. So now I'm at EOD school, and there's some more stuff going on, you know. Um,
If you don't mind me asking, so when you went from the psyop tempo to essentially a schoolhouse training environment, from my own personal experience, right, it feels almost as if the world slows down, as if everything's in slow motion because you've gone from this really high op tempo, constantly doing stuff, constantly working, to essentially you're babysitting and teaching, right? Is what it feels like at times, right? And I'm wondering if that's kind of the same experience you had in that situation.
it was like hitting a wall from 125 miles an hour. So, I started kind of becoming a mountain builder instead of a mountain climber as I was trying to create stuff for me to do because my anxiety was so high. But, I wouldn't admit that because I didn't understand what was even going on with me. I had no clue. So, in an effort to temper a lot of that, I'm running with full kit on, a gas mask canister, pack, dragging a tire, and carrying a log. And that is not an exaggeration. I would try to do that as much as possible to run the anxiety out of me so I was just tapped and I had nothing left. Um, but, I didn't recognize that I was having these panic attacks. I didn't know what was going on with me. So I just become very stoic, very stone faced. And then, what people saw was like, oh my God, this guy is, he's a freaking meat eater, and all that. And then that felt great for the ego. But the truth is I was terrified. And then on top of that, I have this picture in my mind that if I don't do a good job of being an instructor, these guys are going into body bags. So, all this added pressure I'm putting on myself, what was my life like? I didn't have a life. I lived to go to work because I didn't want to leave my house. More superpowers came. There was a lot of stuff that came with that, and but, but again, this was what people didn't see. And what they saw was top performer, he's nailing quals, he's doing all these things. Little idiosyncratic here and there, but whatever. Every EOD tech's a little weird. But the truth was I was not okay. I was not okay. I was burning in pretty hard. I had a great relationship. To this day, actually, she's still like one of my best friends in the whole world, but I couldn't feel anything for her. This woman that would come and see me, and I couldn't feel anything for her. And I developed a fear of flying. Like I'm a freaking halo jumper. I developed out of nowhere. I developed a fear of flying, driving over bridges, and none of it made sense. And I was so ashamed. Like, you're a fucking warfighter, man. What the hell's going on with you? And that's just me talking to myself. There's that negative self-talk. Anyway, I end up getting rotated out, go back to the mobile unit, I end up making chief, and that's great. And then my shoulder finally comes out of socket. So now, one of the nights we got blown up, we ended up at an 8-foot hole in the ground. I apologize again. I got TBI
You're
Ferry,
good, man.
but our JERV, which is a Joint EOD Rapid Response Vehicle, it's an up armored vehicle. Okay, it's a gigantic coffin that deflects blast, evidently, and we're sitting in this hole in the ground, and we're starting to take fire, and I climb up to go grab the turret. We didn't have one of the motorized turrets, so I'm trying to hard over this multi-thousand-pound turret just to get rounds down the street. I ended up tearing the shoulder doing that. And I didn't realize I also had a spinal compression from when the whole world went dark and I woke up in the front of the truck with a robot up my ass. But, you know, anyway, that robot was gentle though, for being
Good. Good.
125
Sometimes they're
pounds.
not, right.
But the point is like, all this damage that I had sustained, that I wouldn't even acknowledge, that I just pushed through it, like, whatever. Don't be a pussy or whatever, nonsense. Be a man, all that stuff. I'm not going to cry. Just when I get blackout drunk, I'm gonna cry my eyes out in shame with myself, or go punch something, go punch a wall or a fence post until my hands bleed. But I'm fine. I'm okay, really. So, long story short, I don't want to eat up too much of the airtime, but life got really, really complicated because now the veneer is cracking. I can't hide it anymore. Like, it's starting to cost me. There was a multitude of factors that were out of my control, but what was in my control, I was not controlling. And so, like, when we were in a workup, we were in Fallon, Nevada, and I got my ass handed to me, and it really put the hook in me. And one night, suicide entered the ring, and I said, you know what? I need to end it. Now, this is kind of ties into something really important, is that nobody was more shocked that I would take my own life than me. So, and there's an important point to that. And it was those warning signs along the way, this all or nothing thinking, I'm either all good or I suck. I didn't see how that could ever be a problem. Um, and the point being was, there I was going, I deserve to die. And I didn't. I tried to do it with Tylenol to shut my liver down, and I didn't die. And that was, thank God. But I challenged God that night. I'm never going to forget that, because that was him telling me I exist and this is fixable. And I said, let's find out if you love me. And that's what I did, and I didn't die. So anyway, we fast forward past these events. I'm going to fast forward to the miracle. I don't have a great story. I just had good friends. I had good supports that were able to talk to me as a person, and not as an operator, and not as a chief, and not as a bro, but as a person, as a human being. And one of them is my good friend, Doc Floor, who said he's really worried about me. And I knew he meant it because he's my brother. And he's like, you're not okay, man. And he handed me the SART paperwork, and I asked him how to fill it out. And he said, fill it out honestly. And I did. And I qualified for CAC level 3. And I'm thinking, this is it. This is the end of my career. And it saved my life. I had to be confronted with the fact that I am, in fact, an alcoholic, because I didn't know what that was. I had no clue. I was like, I don't drink every day. What are you kidding me? I just go pro every time I do it to make the pain inside my head place stop. That's not bad, right? And to put my panic aside, I can't be an alcoholic. But no, I am. And I learned more about it. And I learned the beauty of accountability, that there's nothing wrong with something being wrong with me. So I get done with that program, and then they're like, Chief, you really have really bad PTSD, believe it or not. And we think you should go to the Oasis program. And I figured, why not, screw it. And again, I'm thinking catastrophizing, they're going to, this is it. They're going to take my clearance because I have PTSD. And the beauty of that was I just didn't care anymore. I was like, take my pen, take my stupid uniform. I just don't care. Because when I hit this terrifying realization that if you take my uniform from me, I don't know who I am, that was it. I was like, I don't want that. I need something for my life. So anyway, I meet a bunch of wonderful people, and they help me really confront it. And guess what? I get released, return to full duty. I return to full duty, and I'm just kind of like waiting for this other shoe to drop, and it never transpired. Um, and when I stopped fracturing myself out at this capacity, I'm going to be this person in this capacity, and they all just kind of became the same person. That's when everything got better. When I depersonalized from my job that I'm not my job. I'm not my job. I'm Mike. I just happen to do this. It made me more efficient at my job. Now, I wasn't cured by any stretch of the imagination. It was just the beginning. It was just the beginning for me. And, you know, time goes on. I'm getting ready to sundown, and that's retire. And I'm in Newport, Rhode Island, and I start losing friends to suicide at a pretty alarming rate. And by the time I lost my very close friend, former SEAL, I was like, we got to do something. And there was these suicide prevention programs, which I'm sorry, but there's no human connection with it. It's kind of looking at a bunch of metrics. And the power of a story, a real authentic story, somebody telling you the truth about themselves, I've never seen anything more powerful than that. Because that's what happened to me in rehab with this 19-year-old sailor named Tracy, who's more honest about who she is, what she's been through, what she's done wrong, and what she's doing about it. That's what actually saved me. It was her authenticity, her real story. She wasn't even talking to me. She's just talking to the group, and that was pretty amazing. So I wanted to duplicate that. So
if you don't mind, I
yeah,
think something that's kind of really prevalent within, for example, like the suicide prevention program, the DAPA program, the sexual assault program, like all these different programs within the military that are supposed to provide this type of service for these individuals. A lot of people that are running those programs, or a lot of people working with those programs, are kind of forced into those programs usually. And then once forced into those programs, a lot of times they think, oh, well, this will never actually happen, or the likelihood of this occurring is very low. And so whenever it does actually happen, you start to have these huge glaring issues with the program itself. I know that as a DAPA, I was really excited to start my work as a DAPA, but something I noticed was I thought it would be me talking through the most appropriate and best way to help people suffering from varying addictions to seek help. But a lot of the times it also feels like I'm kind of just the correspondent for the CO, right? And I think whenever you start doing that, you start to get a little bit more disheartened in these programs as well. As far as like how you can make those programs better, I'm not the expert on how you could change those. But from the things you saw, Mike, I'd be interested to see, in your opinions, what are some ways that you could see the Navy fixing some of those programs, or specifically the suicide prevention program?
that was the genesis of the Guardian Spirit Initiative, and that was the program that I helped found. I came up with the name for it and the format, but the real credit's going to go to the team, which was former Master Diver John Summers, Senior Chief Philip Taylor, and Captain T.J. Dixon of OpNav N17. And Captain Dixon heard me out when I was at the Senior Enlisted Academy because I could just talk very openly about everything I had just gone through and what I had learned about myself in front of a forum of a bunch of, senior enlisted judgy McJudgersons, and he was really blown away by that. And I just told him, like, yeah, man, the reason why my life came from together is because I lived in fear of everybody else's judgment of myself to my own peril. And like a couple of amazing things happened when I just did a quick 10-minute kind of speak on my own struggles. I'm getting approached by all these people. And I'm like, this is it, man. This is the power. And Captain Dixon pulled me aside and he said, do you have an idea on how to do this? And I'm like, I do. Another component of this is a former diver who became a NDAC counselor named Don Acker. And he had me speak in Groton. So I don't know what I'm walking into, and I'm speaking to 3,500 people, and I'm like, oh my God, like, okay. I mean, it's a little bigger than, speaking at SARP, but the result of it was so incredible because I'm sharing the truth. I'm sharing about all this stuff, and I'm also sharing about the fears. These are submariners. They have very high clearances. They have different programs too, and I'm speaking to them as a master EOD technician. We disarm nukes, so you got to have a clearance for that. So, and I'm speaking to them and dispelling or dismissing a lot of the stigmas and fears that a lot of us had. And this isn't really to cast blame either. There's only one person I blame for my life going down the shitter, and that's me. But I'm grateful for that experience because had I not done that, we wouldn't have been able to theorize and launch Guardian Spirit Initiative. And it did have a great effect. And for me to finish my career, as an active duty master EOD technician, chief petty officer, and a founder of this initiative that actually helped a lot of people go get help. Between Phil and I can't remember our numbers, but from 2018 to 2020, I don't know what Phil's numbers were because we were dealing with the COVIDery. I don't know if you guys remember that.
Oh, I do. I don't know if you remember the news article that came out of Washington about the entire SEAL platoon that got COVID. That was this guy. That was our platoon. Hey.
Get to work. That's all I can say. But the point is that prior to COVID, we really were having an impact, and it was getting recognized. And I, was able to talk to the chief of naval personnel personally, and we did make quite the impact. Unfortunately, again, COVID hit, and things got priorities shifted. But the point is that human connection piece is the most important piece, that it's not a retired guy coming in. It's a person in active duty coming forward and telling you their story in a format that does not blame, that takes ownership. And when Phil and I were brought to DC, they were saying, you guys as motivational speakers, and Phil just puts his hand up and he goes, we are shame speakers. We share our shame. And I was like, what he said, beautiful. And that was really the truth of it. But that was the point. That was the impact point. It was to share the darkness and then the light. And that was the point of it. Was about, listen, it's going to get real dark out until the conclusion is hit. I need help. I'm not okay. And I didn't want anybody to have to get to the point where I got. That if we can get to the left of it when you're starting to smell smoke instead of the house is on fire, then that's the big win. Well, anyway, that's how that went. And I was, before I'm retiring, I'm wanting to get an MBA because I'm hearing everybody is like, yeah, go into the business world and da-da-da-da, and they love special operators. And I kind of wanted to because I love organizational leadership and I love all that stuff. But at the end of the day, I didn't really want to do it. And I also didn't want to be surrounded by high functioning personality disorders. I just did that. I want to get paid to deal with that. And then somebody asked me, have you ever thought about becoming a counselor? Because I was fielding a lot of phone calls and doing a lot of 12-step work with people, which is just, again, story sharing and getting people into programs. So I said, sure, I guess I could consider it. Don't you have to have like a PhD to do that? And they're like, no, it's a master's level. I was like, oh, no kidding. So I got out, and it was kind of sitting in the back burner. I finished my baccalaureate in organizational leadership through Trident University, and it was actually a great program, by the way. They were like, hey, yeah, with your joint transcript, you're already more than halfway through a bachelor's. I was like, oh, rad. So
Yeah,
great.
there's some really good, and I just wanted to like put it out there for all of our listeners, but there are some really good bachelorette and undergrad programs for military service members. So, and they'll accept a lot of credits. So, for example, I did my undergraduate at George Washington University, and I only had to do 2 years opposed to the 4 years just to finish my bachelor's of science and health science. So, there are a lot of really good programs. You just gotta have to like seek them out or speak to the educational advisors at commands and stuff as well. They usually have that kind of information, but there are some phenomenal programs that really accept the military and really help you out with pursuing your education. And honestly, like if you get into those programs, usually you're going to work with professors that understand kind of like where you're coming from and they're willing to kind of work with you and help you because you're not coming from that traditional background. But sorry, yeah, I just wanted to say that because I know that there's the thing I hate right now where I work currently is well, not where I work, but like in general, like junior sailors aren't usually told the educational opportunities available to them. And so at CEOD, I recently, in the last couple of years, made it a priority to create an education slideshow for junior sailors. So the kids that graduate our course, I sit down, I go over all your education opportunities. And then after going all over these education opportunities, we're like, hey, obviously you can't push for this because you still have EOD school, you still have dive school, you still got EOD school, you still have your workup, you still have your initial qualifications you got to get. But once you get that stuff done, if you want to pursue your education, you absolutely can. And these are the avenues in which you approach that. But yeah, sorry, I didn't want to interrupt you. It's just like education is one of those things I get really passionate about for juniors.
Well, education never even entered my airspace until I got sober, and really like I started to see all kinds of other possibilities. But first things first, and like that's I'm a big fan of the OTAT method, one thing at a time. First things first, we got to put out the freaking fire. So we had to put out the fire, and then as soon as that fire went out, and we're rebuilding my home. Now I'm looking at the world a lot differently. I'm like, I'm going to go get my bachelor's degree. That never entered my airspace, not one time. I was like, I need to be going to other schools. I got to go to, space jumping, free fall jump master, dive master, whatever the hell it is, master blaster, something, but never once would I even consider higher education. I just wanted to, again, go back to war. And anyway, no regrets, no regrets. The, the thing is, sorry if I lost my place again, TBI ferry. Um, Getting that baccalaureate was really helpful. TA'd all of that out, and then I'm retired, and I messed around a little bit with operations director, and then I got a job working in a warehouse because I was like, I just want a job with the least amount of responsibility. So I worked at Steel in the Steel Northeast, and it was great. It was actually a great company, man. Really good culture there, bust and hump and all that. But I ended up getting picked up for Sacred Heart's clinical mental health counseling program and challenged it and came out the other end. And then I got, I my mentor took me under her wing, a friend and a very gifted counselor, and gave me guidance. And now I'm very happy to say I work for her, and it's been a phenomenal thing. But along the way, a lot of people ask me about, why do I do this? Is it is it because I'm trying to make an impact, or it's no, it's not like that. It's I don't help people, and that's kind of how I see it. Is I show them how to help themselves because that's what was done for me. Is that they were showing me that I have all the tools. They ask the questions. They provide me with a different way of thinking. They challenge me. They get me to confront myself. And nothing bad has ever come of that. Nothing bad. Only good things. And is it painful? Is it uncomfortable? Yeah. Yeah, it is. It is. So is going to the gym. It can be painful and uncomfortable. And the more you do it, the better you get at it, and you develop strength, and you develop better habits, and you develop technique, and then before you know it, you're kind of fit, you know. And I look at mental health through the lens of performance optimization, and as opposed to mental health. And it's been nothing but an amazing gift to have received that help, because it gave me a lot of perspective. I'm not saying that's all as to why, because I've always been kind of a helper type. I've always enjoyed working with people. Like, I've always enjoyed that. Even as a little kid, I loved doing that stuff. Um, but to duplicate what was given to me is an incredible privilege. It's not always gratifying. It's a lot of hard work. Everybody's at different levels in life, and again, the expectation management is key. And that's for anybody looking to be in the mental health field, is that everybody's at a very different level. But anybody coming to see you quite literally is doing the best they can. It just looks differently for everybody. So,
Mike, I got a quick question for you.
yes, sir.
So one of the biggest things that you had talked about was like identifying like where you were at when you were kind of like coming to terms with your addiction in the recovery program, and how the young sailor, she had, in her authenticity, was kind of modeling the behavior of like, hey, this is really how you connect to it to make you look at yourself in an authentic way as well.
Yes.
And then therein starting to kind of, you know, not necessarily put things into place, but then to like understand that that's there, that these things exist for you, and that recovery lies in the understanding. And but then starting with that and then moving forward into the job that you are doing, and as you were learning to do it as a counselor, how does authenticity in the job that you perform now, is there a big impact for you to bring like an authentic, like to kind of shed titles and things like that in providing counseling services, like being authentic, right? Like that process.
I find that treating a human being like a human being is really important. And I know how uncomfortable it is to meet a new counselor. I know how weird that situation is. So I would rather know that I'm talking to a human being. So maybe, it is also about reading the room. It's you're there for them at the capacity they need you to be there. So some people require a more directive approach. Some people want more of that. But at the end of the day, you're treating a person like a person, and you're talking to them like they're a person. If I'm hiding behind my professional title, then I'm not being a person with them. I don't know if you guys have been paying attention. I like to joke around. I do that a lot, and when somebody's sharing a lot of heavy things with you, there's trust required. So I think being authentic is a big part of it, but that was what I had learned how to do through my own recovery, because I think I'm being authentic, but I'm not. I'm actually just being what I think I need you to see. And that's not real. That's not real at all. So no, I like rom-coms. I have cats. I'm a freaking nerd. Uh, you know, I'm many things. I enjoy those things. And I'm a lot more than just a therapist. I'm a lot more than a former EOD tech. I'm a lot more than a former chief. There's a lot of that, and helping a person understand that about themselves, that they're not their job, they're not their titles, they're not the things that they've done wrong. That's a really important thing, is the over-identification with pathology in of itself is a problem. Like, looking through, like, diagnostically, if you were to look at me in my past, you'd say, okay, alcohol use disorder, severe, combat post-traumatic stress disorder, traumatic brain injury, and you'd see all these things. But no, those are things that I have. Those are not who that I am. And a book that I had read was Struggle Well by Kenneth Falk, the owner of Boulder Crest, who really hit it hard with post-traumatic growth. Post-traumatic growth. Instead of staying stuck in the, this is who I am, like, it's not who I am, it's what I have, and we're going to move through it, and we're going to get stronger, we're going to find new ways, new tools, and we're moving towards growth model. That to me is the big win. It's just different for everybody, and that's the point. Is it's a matter of being patient, realistic.
On authenticity, right? You're talking about being like a big proponent of being authentic with patients. What would you say to individuals who are trying to become more authentic in their practice? So maybe clinical psychologists or counselors or social workers or other people that are currently working within practice. What would be your advice to them to help them take a more authentic approach with their clients?
Go to therapy. Go to therapy and look at the things that you don't want to look at about yourself, and make yourself vulnerable so that you can understand what you're doing. We all have stuff that we need to work on in life. And if you're a provider, like any provider at all, if you're a healthcare provider in general, I would always recommend going to see a therapist, because, it has to do with stress, and then you're doing a lot of care and doing all that. Same with first responders and people of that. It's just checking in, man. It's just checking in, because that's where you can get into these danger zones. But again, working on authenticity is a matter of just being honest with yourself. But that's what works for this clinician. I would never say do it my way. I just know what works for me. Some people are really good at being the professional persona, and that works for them. And that's fantastic. It doesn't, I think, hurt their practice. But for this person, I will do everything in my power to be as authentic as possible, and use a lot of Rogerian methods, which is client-centered, which is unconditional positive regard. And I will always show respect for whoever shows up, because I know what it takes to do that.
I think that that's a really good and important aspect to kind of take into it. I myself am a big fan of Carl Rogers and kind of like the Rogerian way of thinking. Something I do notice though as well is when you start talking about like kind of the professional stonewall kind of like aspect that you can see in some therapists and psychiatrists, it kind of reminds me of a podcast I listened to and watched recently with Theo Vaughn, which I'm sure everyone here probably knows who Theo Vaughn is, but Theo Vaughn and Gabriel Maté. Gabriel Maté, if anyone doesn't know, is a psychiatrist out of Canada who has done a lot of work with those suffering from substance-related use disorders. And while Theo Vaughn during the podcast is talking a bit about the traumas that they've gone through in their life, they keep making these jokes. And you can kind of quickly see that Gabriel Maté, or Dr. Gabriel Maté, almost doesn't react to the jokes, but instead counters it with the reaction of like, oh, this is a trauma response in this individual. His trauma response is to make these jokes about the situation ongoing. I think that's another aspect to consider as well, is if you have a client who's kind of making those kind of jokes, it might be beneficial to kind of like, okay, you made a joke about that. You were very serious and now you made a joke about that. Let's kind of dive into that joke a little bit.
Yeah. But again, there's also, we have to look at through the lens of professional boundaries as too. There's boundary lines that, you can be authentic, you can be goofy and all that, but there is a professional boundary, and it's a matter of understanding that. I did a fair amount of making mistakes, through internship. I will not tell you I've got everything figured out, but I'm really happy I did. Coming away from that zero defect mentality is a really big deal, because that zero defect mentality actually creates it's a wellspring of pathology, because it creates this dishonesty where we're not going to be honest about problems. And that's not good. That's not how you solve problems. So Again, I always try to create an environment where somebody is safe, that they can be vulnerable, and it's okay. And that's why that authenticity, in my opinion, is good. Is that we want them to be safe in a place where they can, do whatever or say whatever's on their mind. Because like, even recently, like, people were reluctant to tell me who they voted for, and I'm like, I'm a therapist. I don't care. Like, say what you want. I even told somebody, like, say hamster nipples. And they're like, what? I'm like, I'll do it. Hamster nipples. See, I said it. You're good. Say whatever you want in here. I don't care. you know? And again, it's just like using that humor. But again, we want to be for a person to say whatever's on their mind, you know? And that to me is the big push within, the authenticity matrix, as it were.
Absolutely. I think, yeah, I mean, the way you're explaining it to me, it sounds sort of like it's very difficult, obviously, to have someone bring their walls down as it is. And then even more so whenever they're going to see a therapist, especially for the first time, because when you're going to see a therapist for the first time, you start to kind of worry about what judgments might they be having. Right. And whenever you present yourself as a more authentic individual with a lot of empathy, and you kind of take this empathetic approach to your patient care or your client care, you create this almost like this safe space, this safety, this area of safety that can help a patient kind of break down those walls and really be open about what's going on. And once someone's able to be open about what's going on, they're able to kind of understand where some of these underlying traumas come from, what the origins are for some of these afflictions that they're dealing with.
Absolutely. And I try to, like, psychoeducation is a big piece of what I do as well. It's not enough. Like, the over pathologizing everything. Sorry, today it's everywhere. It's like, look, here's trauma. I'm going to explain it to you. Trauma writes this fiction story about self and the world around us. And we make our life work around that fiction story. And it works for a while until it collides with reality. And then we have to, like, kind of ask ourselves, is this story even true? And that's what we work on in therapy. Like, looking at triggering, everybody's favorite word. It's nothing more than the hippocampus is receiving a signal. The hippocampus is very middle of your brain. I call it the RAM. It's the random access memory. And it's receiving a signal, sight, sound, smell, touch, whatever. And it's having this problem differentiating similar from same. And as a result, it's signaling the amygdala, the danger almond, telling the adrenal glands, get ready for something. What? Don't know. And now your conscious mind is scanning, trying to figure out what the hell is happening when it's completely autopilot. And that's the autonomic nervous system. So again, using this it's kind of a fringy technique. Are you guys, I don't know if you're familiar with it. It's called breathing. And just doing this one thing and taking in a very deep breath and lengthening your exhale is actually getting you out of the midbrain and pushing that blood flow back into the prefrontal cortex. And it's strongly encouraged, and I prescribe it an awful lot. And anybody can do it. It's free of charge. It's free. But I do recommend using different breathing techniques. But again, just something that simple that we don't think about is it can make all the difference in the world. And it's like, once a person's anxiety is mitigated, just even in that moment, they start to develop this thing called hope. And that's a big part of recovery in general, is hope. You go to a therapist with the hope that it's going to get better, and being able to provide just a little bit of hope, and not just that, but confidence. Confidence is this thing that comes through experience, not to be mistaken for cockiness or arrogance. Arrogance is the Axe body spray of incompetence, in my opinion. Arrogance comes from once upon a time I did something cool and now I can just be an ass about it, or I've never done anything cool and I'm just going to be an ass like I've done something cool. Either way, Axe body spray of incompetence. Uh, Sorry, Axe. I don't know if I'm allowed to say that.
So something I wanted to touch on that you kind of mentioned. So you talked about hope, and given the nature of your story,
Mm-hmm.
specifically with alcohol use,
Mm-hmm.
something I found really interesting about like 12-step programs is
Mm-hmm.
kind of this creation of hope within solidarity. So as I mentioned before, right? So I'm a command DAPA. Whenever I went through the course, I remember I had to go to an AA meeting as part of the requirement, and I loved it. And it beforehand, right? I was very ignorant to AA. I was kind of like, oh, AA is kind of BS. It's just a bunch of like it's what's the word I'm looking for here? Like religious propaganda or whatever, right? Like I didn't have any real care for AA as like a treatment option or like something for people to use. And I remember I went to this course and I went to this program. It was a program where they would listen to music and they would talk about how the music relates to their journey and their story. And I remember there was an individual. I don't want to give away too much information. I don't want to give any names or anything like that. Um, but I remember this individual showed up, and at the end of the meeting, they thanked everyone, and they said, I was recently denied entrance into this rehabilitation program. I'm from an area that basically it's government funded, and because I was denied, I immediately sank down. And they said, if this was the old me and I didn't have you all here and I wasn't able to see that this meeting was going online in the next 30 minutes, I would have went to the liquor store and I would have immediately lost all the progress I've made. And I remember I heard this individual say this, and I remember tearing up a bit because in my mind, I'm thinking, a lot of times when people talk about alcoholics or people suffering from alcoholism, it's usually from a place of ignorance. And even whenever I was discussing AA, it was from a place of ignorance. And only through hearing that story was I really able to kind of connect and kind of think, man, it really is shitty. Like it is a really shitty place to be. And I couldn't imagine having to go through that myself, right? Um, I wanted to kind of share that story a little bit, and then Mike, given your involvement, what are what are some ways for those who may be struggling to really get involved with AA if that was what they're looking for, if they feel like that is one of their helps or one of their options for help?
Absolutely. Well, first off, the 12 step is was the most potent weapon in my arsenal. It's a matter of looking at it now, looking at it through um, as a therapist. It is very potent cognitive behavioral therapy. It's bare knuckle. It's very bare knuckle. I mean, if every 12 step program's got their first three steps, and it's we admitted we were powerless over alcohol, drugs, whatever. I got one easier than that. We admitted we were powerless over our own thinking, and our life is unmanageable. Step two, came to believe that a power greater than our fear could relieve us of our suffering. And step three, made a decision to turn our will and our life over to a power greater than our fear. So we're looking at this driver. This driver is fear. It's always fear, fear-based decision making. Anxiety is fear. Even the most self-centered, uh, pathologically speaking, looking at some of the Axis 2 cluster Bs, fear is the God, period. Fear, I'm not going to have this, or this person's going to do this. And it's always fear that's driving that. So something's got to be more powerful than fear. When we look at the recovery groups themselves, they are so amazing because it's a group of people that are not going to judge you. You know, you're in a place where people definitely understand, and the difference is they have a solution. It's like the same thing that keeps most people out of therapy. You know, looking back in my own story, I'm not going to go to a therapist because they're going to tell me everything I already know about myself. It's like, yeah, true, but they have a solution and you do not. So, you know, and it's also not as bad as you think it is. I don't know about you, but I'm a serial catastrophizer. So it's like, you know, if I jump into the DeLorean and go to the past, it's all regret. And if I go to the future, everything's on fire. And the bottom line is I suck at time travel. So I got to work on being present. And that's what a lot of the recovery programs do, is they provide us the here and now, just the here and now. And that's
That's
peace.
well, and so something else you mentioned too. So you mentioned this no, like, fear of judgment, right?
Yes.
And I reached back out to the individual that was running the AA group because I wanted to make sure I didn't mess up the quote. But something they told me that I still think of is they said that everyone's story is uniquely ununique. And whenever I asked, what does that mean? They said, well, everyone has their own unique story. However, everyone is ununique in the fact that they're all struggling with this issue. And that's why we're all here together, is to kind of lean on each other and help basically like get over this addiction, get over this issue. And that's just something that's kind of stuck with me a lot, is since that course, is that uniquely ununique. And it's such, I think it's such a beautiful way to kind of think of it. And especially since there can be so many similarities between various stories. Mike, you and I both have a mutual friend who has parts of their story that are very similar to your own, right? And you know, they unfortunately were not able to overcome those issues, right? And you know, that can be a point of contingency for a lot of people. And so by understanding that all of our stories have kind of this common occurrence and connection in some regard, can also be peaceful in that way as well.
Yeah. In the recovery circles, we call it terminal uniqueness. So, you know, when I reflect back in, like, with Guardian Spirit, one of the things I used to say was, for a long time, I believed I was a unicorn in uniform until I went to SARP and I went to the Oasis program, and I would later learn that I'm just a jackass with a blender duct taped to my forehead, telling everyone I'm a fucking unicorn. And it's like, it's just a joke, but it's like all the shame and guilt make us believe that we're the only ones in the world that would ever have gone through that. But it's just not true. It's not true. And even one of the things that I tell a lot of clients that I work with is that diagnosis is not destiny. And there's a big, I've started to notice it more with Gen Z, this over identification with diagnosis, and it's more of a hindrance. And I don't mean to generalize, it's something I'm observing. And I started doing a bit of research into it. And I came across a book called The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt, who's an amazing research psychologist. And he ends up like really explaining it. Because some of the other things I hear a lot are people say they need to make an impact in the world to have purpose. And it's like, what does that mean? Well, because of the information age, there's this belief that you don't exist unless you're online. Like, people can't go to the gym and just go to the gym. They have to go to the gym, take a picture of themselves at the gym. And to me, that's kind of, I see that as a kind of a warning sign that there's a fragile sense of self. And a lot of that does come developmentally from technology. And there's a lot of great studies that are coming out now.
Well,
We're seeing that.
with that, spoiler alert, everyone. So I was interviewed for a PsyD program to preface this, and I got accepted. But for the actual portion I'm getting to, the one of the questions I had during the interview was during a group portion, and they said that They wanted us to kind of imagine that there is a child post COVID era, post COVID-19, that is having an issue with the way they are feeling portrayed through social media and online and stuff like that. And we kind of discussed as a group, what we would do as psychologists. And I remember there was a lot of like back and forth where some people were like, "Oh, you tell the kid to stop using social media." The other argument was the my argument at least was our job isn't to tell anyone not to do anything. Our argument should be, why is it that that's bothering you so much, and then how can you overcome that being an issue. And it reminds me of this research article, and I'd have to pull it back up, but there was a research article done a while back that kind of showed us that having so much social media presence is great in the sense that we feel like we're in connection with everyone. However, it's also negative because we are currently living in a society where some people feel that they are so well connected but have never felt more alone in their life, right? And so that raises the question as to, is social media a good thing? Is social media a bad thing? Um, and I think that's something that research is going to have to continue to kind of like touch in on. Dan, do you have any thoughts, opinions?
Yeah, yeah. So one of them was, too much of anything is can be bad for you, right? It's the same thing with uh, just the general concepts of what happens from addiction, right? Having this worldwide connection draws a lot of people, and especially during the COVID time, it was the primary way for people to kind of connect to friends and family that aren't within their quarantine bubbles, right? So a lot of people leaned into jumping into social media, and social media is available 24/7. So it's easy to, and I'm generalizing a lot of this as well, but I mean there's far reaching aspects of this, is like having this at your fingertips 24/7, and it's the lifeline that you have for a lot of people to kind of connect. It is going to create this need that becomes the new reality of connection. But what we see on social media a lot is that it's a lot of its comments of the faceless, right? So people are making comments, making jibes, saying things because their face isn't attached to something. So these other people who have become kind of dependent on this process are now hearing all of this crazy shit, like this very hurtful, whatever it might be, if anything, to just stir the pot. And now it adds to the panic or whatever, right? Like any of these big emotions that start coming up, and then now it's manifesting in these really really terrible ways post COVID, and even during, right? Because a lot of the times what we were hearing of people that were transitioning out of the military was, hey, what happened to so and so? And then they get put in these social bubbles, and they're reaching out, or they don't, and they're like, well, nobody cares. And so there's all of these really complex things happening, either not being connected or being overly connected in this really false way, and all of these things happening. So Zach, you and I talked about this in the past, right? Like this was in 2022, 2023. It wasn't like not a month or two would go by we're not hearing if someone didn't commit suicide, or something happened, or then we find out that this guy over here had been really sick for a long time, but nobody knew because they got put in this bubble, and just nobody can contacted him. That turned into like at least former military veterans creating this like, hey, let's do buddy checks, which was great, and the concept behind that is phenomenal. So there's all of these like little elements that have to kind of expand to address these things. And you're talking about like how these psychologists are identifying it, or they're saying that like these Gen Zers are identifying a lot of this, like, hey, look at me, this is the thing that connects them to the world too. So And Mike, brother, you're hitting it right on the head too. Like how is it impacting you, right? Like why, or how can we get through this? And or what are some things that you can do for you to kind of, yeah, go for it.
Again, one of the things that like I think I bring to the table is an asymmetric process. This is where like being a master EOD technician has been beneficial diagnostically, because the symptom is very seldom the problem. Symptom chasing is often not a good way to go about things, because somebody could come to you and they're like, I'm super depressed and da 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 da, and you're not like, and they'll hit every wicket for depression, but then you start asking about their day, and you discover like, oh, they have adrenal fatigue because they live in a perpetual state of anxiety. So that's actually what the problem is, and it's not the symptoms of the problem. ADHD, for instance, it's a huge one, but why? Well, the answer is we're holding this distraction box in our hands, and through habitual work, we're fracturing our attention out. So again, I don't want to come across as if I'm castigating Gen Z, because that's not
Right.
at all my intention. Like one of the things I notice about social media, and I came up with this kind of term for it. I call it algorithmic emotional abuse, because the way it is designed, if you watch like The Social Dilemma and you just read some of these studies, and I mean read real studies for the love of God, you're going to see that what's actually happening is a trauma bonded relationship with this high dopamine spike, and then boom, cortisol comes up, and then your dopamine comes down, and you're constantly trying to bring your dopamine up, but it's keeping you down. That's an abusive relationship that keeps you coming. Like, and that's kind of the in my opinion, from what I've seen, is a lot of the algorithm is designed to do that. So now we're looking at it and going, well, because of this I do this. Stop. I'm going to go to something very important. As a person in recovery and as a clinician, victimhood is a dangerous pathology. It is a very dangerous pathology, because victimhood validates, vindicates, and justifies all wrongdoing. I had a million and one reasons why I drank the way I did. I had people that said some really crappy things to me, and people that were doing crappy things to me that got me over the edge to the suicide. The point is, I own that. I own that. And that means if I have the decision to make to do these bad things, and I have the decision to make to change them. And that's what I did. And that's empowerment, and that's real power. The most powerful thing I learned to say, oh my God, are you guys sitting down? Good. I was wrong.
Oh, hang on. Let me
Free.
turn this down a little bit. I think my wife is listening. I can't have her do that.
There's nothing wrong with being wrong.
Right.
Nothing. But this pervasive fear, this zero defect mentality, will create the largest amount of defects. In the book Anti-Fragile, Nicholas Taleb Nassim talks about this at great length. And it's not even a book necessarily about psychology, but rigid system thinking. You know, I'm always this, or I'm never this. Like, that's rigid, man. That's really rigid. And the more rigid something is the more fragile it will become. So we must be able to flex. And what I like about working in the psychological field for, psychological pathology is the gray space, not black, not white, but gray, and where we can operate within that gray. And that's where the recovery exists.
And
What are your thoughts?
maybe develop some cognitive flexibility. Oh, that's great.
All right. Well, we have a little bit of time left, so I'll just kind of open it up if there's any last questions that anyone may have, or if there's anything else people want to talk about. Once we're done with that, we'll move into our closeout. And yeah. So, Dan, do you have anything else you'd like to say?
Yeah. Hey, I'm really interested in. So you're an LPA, what is it? LPCA. Okay. What do you have to do to get to be an LPC? And then what are you fixing to do for your like next, what's your next step after? Because I'm dying to find out, brother, because I want to, we have to stay linked up, and if there's ever anything that we can do in the future, like I'm calling you.
I like right now, LPCA means I'm a licensed professional counseling associate, which means I'm not fully licensed yet. Upon graduation from a CACREP accredited clinical mental health counseling program in the state of Connecticut, I owe 3,000 postgraduate hours. And then in that time, I can take the national counseling examination. And then once those hours are satisfied and pass the examination, then I am a licensed professional counselor. Now, in the time that while you're, I'm gonna use the you statement to anybody listening. You can still get other certifications while you're doing it. Like right now, I'm finishing my last bit of certification in EMDR, which is a very potent tool, and I absolutely love it. Eye movement reprocessing desensitization, or desensitization reprocessing. Sorry, TBI. But man, what an incredible tool. And like the way I explain it to people is that sometimes when we have traumatic events, um, I'm sorry, it's like a lot to talk about, but I just kind of want to put it out there. It's like traumatic events happen, you fall down, you scrape your knee, and gravel gets in there, and then the knee heals up, but it doesn't heal correctly. And every now and again, you get that reminder of that event, and it's somatic. With EMDR, we're opening that up and we're pulling the rocks out to allow it to heal. And it heals naturally, and the hold of this really terrible memory or terrible thing is reduced because we're watching how it affects everything else in life. And I think it's a fantastic tool. Does it work for everybody? No, not at all. But it does work. And and in that time, that from now making I statements is definitely learning more as you go. And the one thing I love about the mental health field is it's impossible to know everything. Like even modalities, I'd say I'm competent at most modalities, but the thing is I'm still learning, and they're constantly evolving and changing. We're going to have new challenges. I mean, COVID has provided us with a multitude of challenges. We're definitely learning how to not make a light bulb, so to speak, but it's a great field. I enjoy it, and the pinnacle I'm trying to pursue eventually, but I want time in the field, is I'd like to get a PsyD. And the reason I want a PsyD is because they're the CW05. Whereas I see the PhDs as they're the line officers, but the PsyD is the CW05. They specialize with people, and yes, they can administer the metrics and do all that, but the specialization is in fact with the person, and that's why PsyD really appealed to me. And then also, I had an amazing PsyD at the Oasis Clinic, Dr. Barnett, and I love her to death because she body blowed my ego so freaking hard. And she just did it with a smile, but she was fantastic, and we all loved her because of how she knew how to work with us as people. And eventually I'd like to get there, but first I'm kind of using my approach that I've learned through a lot of other things, basic, senior, master. So I would like to get some experience under my belt first.
Oh yeah.
And that's just my path. That's the path I prefer. I mean, I'm not quite vintage yet, but I'm 46, and I realize, but by the time I get a PsyD, I might be in my mid 50s. But I don't care, it's like whatever. The mountain's got no top, so just keep climbing. And the other thing is about, if I could come away with anything is stopping to, and I'm just speaking for me here, is to actually live my life and not survive it. you know, to actually have that living space. You know, whereas before is this goal oriented, I got to, and it's like, what? You know, what's it all for? And it's all about like living in that experience as we go. And that's what I've learned how to do. I don't do it perfectly. I mean, you get me on Interstate 84 with, people updating their social media while driving, and I don't look like, I don't resemble Buddha, you know.
Right.
But you know, but again, this isn't about perfection. It's about progress. And there's been a lot of progress in my life because of this field. But again, I want to just drive home on getting away from pathologizing and getting away from like the whole world's against me. If we really take a moment and just look at the things that we're doing, it doesn't matter the why. Who cares? It's like I'm stabbing myself in the neck with a fork. It doesn't matter why I'm doing it. Can we all agree that that's not okay? All right, we can. All right, cool. Let's find another way. Let's find what mechanism's driving that. What's driving that? And then that's that maladaptive coping strategy. Because when I stab myself in the neck, it's taking my mind off of whatever, and now you're getting into the matrix of all maladaptive coping. Anger, drugs, alcohol, sex addiction, video game addiction is very real, by the way. Video game addiction operates on the exact same dopamine matrix. The process addictions in general are very complex. They're not simple. So when I say process addiction, for those of you out there, I'm talking gambling, shopping addiction, pornography addiction is a co-occurrence between sex addiction and that. But again, it's a process addiction. So it's not very straight lined either. That's the other thing diagnostically. It's not a very straight line. Human beings are hyperdimensional creatures. So, not everybody's the same. It's PTSD looks different for different people. And then there's varying levels of severity. That's where psychoeducation is a really big piece of what I do. Again, it's not an invisible monster. This is why it's happening. Like for alcoholism in general, we look at alcohol. Alcohol is a sedative. So what does it do? It's working on the GABA receptor, but it's also working on the opiate receptors. So now you take that away. What do you have when you're not producing GABA? Is you have glutamate. And when glutamate comes up, what are you going to get? A rise in norepinephrine. So, and it's also going to throw dopamine and serotonin off. So you're going to have this panic state. And if we can endeavor to, again, like if you're severe, please go to detox. But if we can allow ourselves this window of tolerance to work through distress and breathe and do something else, play a guitar, go to the gym, do this thing, and just allow ourselves that ability to endure discomfort, it becomes a nothing. It becomes a nothing, and in today's world, there's a lot of instant access and instant gratification to things that denies us this struggle experience. And without struggle, there's no growth. If you look into the German neuroscientist Michael Nels talks about the prevalency rates of Alzheimer's and dementia in the first world. And it has a lot to do with our very sedentary emotional and cognitive lifestyle, which is causing hippocampal degeneration. That we're not getting enough emotional struggle, that we're not getting enough struggle. So it's causing anxiety spikes and a lot of other things. So get out, go adventure, go do things, go be wrong, get into a debate. It's okay. It's okay to be uncomfortable. It is okay to be uncomfortable.
Yeah, and I know the something else too that's come out a lot recently, especially with Alzheimer's, is kind of how that being a more mentally I don't want to use the word like flexible, but like more training, like more mental training, right? Like working out your brain essentially is also very prudent to preventing that plaque buildup that actually causes a lot of the symptoms you see within Alzheimer's disease. And to kind of like go a little bit further with that, just being able to scroll your phone is not doing that. So when you start looking at people that are doing this doom scrolling effect, like that's not going to be giving you that mental workout that they're really like talking about within that regard. And, you know, Mike, I'm pretty sure I can speak for both Dan and myself here whenever I say that we have both loved having you on. I think this has been an awesome episode, and honestly, the best we could have done for our first video episode as well. This has been amazing. It's been awesome having you on. And I know that your story resonates with a lot of people. I think we spoke about it before. The person that told me to look you up was one of the people that actually went to one of your speeches while you were in the Navy still. And, you know, it's crazy that even all this time later, they still click, they still remember that. And I remember they were like, they found out I was going to psychiatry or psychology, and they were like, "Oh, you should look up Mike Szot." And I was like, "I don't know who that is." And they're like, "You should look him up." And I was like, "Sure, I'll look him up." And that's actually how I ended up finding you to begin with. But yeah, man, it has been an honor. It has been awesome to have you on. And I definitely hope to bring you back on in the future, because it'd be really cool. I'd especially love to have you on once you end up getting those 3,000 hours again. Obviously, you can come on before that, but whenever you get that 3,000 hours, it'd be cool to see like what you see now that you're no longer basically being watched over while you're doing it, how your practice has changed or what new things that you've picked up. So yeah, it's been awesome. And yeah, for all of our viewers, let me just say I'm sorry. I know this is supposed to come out in January. It it's mainly on me. I've been pretty stressed lately with looking for doctorate invites and interviews and stuff like that. That being said, I didn't mention it earlier in the episode, but I have been accepted to a PsyD program, and my wife and I are kind of discussing about whether or not I'll be accepting it. Right now, it looks like we probably are going to be accepting it, which means we'll be making the large move from northern Chicago to Chicago. So that would be pretty interesting to be city dwellers. But yeah, Dan and I will hopefully be having a new episode coming out in, I want to say, maybe not February. So next month, early next month, look for our next episode. I was going to say February, but we'll just be honest and say next month. If it's earlier, then you know what? It was a surprise, and you're welcome. So it's been awesome having everyone on. And yeah, Dan, anything you'd like to say before we head out?
No, just yeah, keep looking back to see what we have coming up. And Mike, again, brother, it was a pleasure, man.
Honor's mine, man. Thank you very much. And I wanted to apologize about my cat is screaming outside the door. So if you guys were hearing that, yeah, she's quite the handful.
That's okay.
No, it's perfectly fine, man. Yeah, thanks again. And yeah, to all of our viewers, we will see you all in the next one.